Welcome to Haunted Talks, the official podcast of The Haunted Walk, offering thematic walking tours and paranormal adventures in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, Ontario. My name is Jim Dean. I am the creative director, and I really appreciate you joining us for today's show. One of the best things about The Haunted Walk are the amazing and talented tour guides we get to work with night in and night out. At the moment, we have close to 100 tour guides leading adventures across our 3 cities. Over our 25 years, we must have had over 1,000 different tour guides who have donned the cloak and carried the lantern for us. And to be honest, we could not do it without them. They are the lifeblood of everything we do. More than that, they are a diverse and fascinating group from a variety of backgrounds and with many different beliefs. As we've just started hiring for our 2019 season in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, and if you're interested in being a tour guide, we'd love to hear from you. And you can fill out an application at hauntedwalk.com/jobs. I thought it might be fun to take you behind the scenes a bit and give you the chance to meet one of our tour guides, Rogue Benjamin. She works for our Toronto team, was witness to one of the most compelling paranormal sightings in our company's history, is a professional cosplayer, and has also recently published her first book. Busy lady. But before we get to that, I did want to let you know as we make our way toward the end of February and hopefully towards spring, we are back to giving tours each weekend in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto. And if you've never done a tour with us in the winter, it is well worth it. The cities often become much quieter and still, and if you add in some gently falling snow, you have a really magical setting to hear some incredible stories. If you aren't available on a weekend, but have a group of 5 or more, we can often add additional departures to the schedule on other days. So feel free to get in contact. For information about our schedule and our adventures, please feel free to visit our website, which is hauntedwalk.com. As I mentioned off the top of the show, we are hiring, and if you are interested in being a tour guide yourself, we need to hear from you. And the application takes less than 2 minutes to fill out and doesn't require a cover letter, resume, or references. So if you think the idea of getting paid to tell spooky stories sounds like a good idea, you need to fill out an application at hauntedwalk.com/jobs. We look forward to seeing those come in.
Anyone can definitely be a guide so long as you're willing to, I think, really work with the script. I think there's, for some people, depending, like if you have an acting background, it might be different, or a general performance background. But if you're coming into this quite green and quite new, it's important to remember that you're going to want to review that script a lot. You don't just learn it once and then sort of have that. I actually have myself recorded on my phone, and generally when I'm on the subway down to work, I will listen to whatever tour I'm giving one last time just to revamp. And sometimes, I'm not quite like actively listening to it, but it's even just the background audio to keep everything sort of fresh in my mind. And I think that's an important thing for anyone trying to do this. Because then you have that confidence. There's almost and you know that you can fall back on the information you have, and then you don't have to worry about being as nervous, which will also help you slow down, which would be my second biggest tip. Personally, as you can even hear right now, I tend to speak at the pace of a Gilmore Girl, and it's something that I work on a lot. Even in my interpreting work, I know that I speak quite quickly, and if you're going to tell a good story, people need time to envision it. They need time to really get to the meat of what you're saying and think beyond just the sound of your voice. So if you go too quickly, it doesn't give them enough time to really appreciate what they're hearing. And of course, I know it's hard when you're nervous, but to help combat that also, make sure to take a breath. Remember to breathe. Breathing is huge and something I think we all forget to do a little too often. And the last thing would be, I think, to just have fun with it. The stories are creepy, but they're fun and they have a lot of really good moments, and just sort of find those moments in the story you really enjoy and find ways to make that connection with your audience so you can see them enjoying those moments too.
Rogue Benjamin has been a tour guide with us in Toronto since 2014. Unless you've been on a tour with her, you may not recognize her voice. But if you follow us, you would most likely recognize her, as she is in many ways the face of the Haunted Walk, appearing on the cover of our award-winning rat card and many other of our promo materials. Being a professional cosplayer, she's very comfortable in front of the camera and always does a great job. But we'll get to all that. A first question I love to ask our tour guides is which is their absolute favorite story to tell while on tour.
One of my favorite stories is one of the less paranormal stories and more just creepy and bloody stories. And it comes from the tour that we do, the original Haunted Walk in the core area of Toronto. And it starts basically, you walk the group over and they can see the St. Lawrence Marketplace. And he pointed out, sort of saying, the St. Lawrence Market is one of the longest running markets in North America. And it's very popular here with both locals and tourists. Now, when you step through the doors of the market, it can be difficult to imagine that the area has seen many dark days over the years. In 1803, the block that we're currently standing in was home to not only the local market where the town would buy their goods, it was also the center of crime and punishment. So there were stocks, pillories, whipping posts right here on site. Public punishment was a regular part of life here in the town, and people could be sentenced for just about any reason. To give you an example of this, in 1804, there was a woman named Elizabeth Ellis who received a prison sentence of 6 months and then 2 days in the pillory for 2 hours at a time. Now, her crime was being a nuisance. Now, if you think about that little brother or sister of yours, imagine back in the day what you could have had them publicly serving punishment for. And there was even another resident, Campbell, who actually received a very similar punishment for the crime of using seditious words. Now, eventually the stocks would see their final use in 1834, but that was not the end of horrific events here on site. In fact, that year, a meeting took place at the temporary city hall at the market, and it came to a gruesome end. You see, previous meetings had been shouting matches between the reformers and the governing men, nicknamed the Family Compact. And during the overcrowded meeting, a member of the Family Compact gave a rousing speech. Now, this speech prompted cheers, people started clapping, people started to stomp their feet. And the gallery they were standing on couldn't withstand such a feat, you could say. It collapsed under their weight. Now, remember, I told you this was also the marketplace, and there were functioning market stalls and businesses beneath, including a butcher stall with metal hooks, glistening, ready for the hanging of meat. The Patriot, a newspaper at the time, reported, "The butcher's hooks caught the falling victims and lacerated them, most shockingly. 2 were killed, many were injured, and, well, the reformers were unsympathetic, to say the least. They were actually quoted as saying, 'There go the damned Tories.' Politics, it can be a little bloody." That's one of my favorite ones, I think, for a couple of reasons. It's not just spooky, it's just so visceral with the imagery. And I love that about that particular story.
Like most of us who work for the Haunted Walk, and I suspect many of you who are listening as well, as we look back on our lives, we can often trace back our interest in the paranormal. Campfire ghost stories, abandoned houses in our neighborhoods, or scary movies clandestinely watched in the middle of the night. These seeds, often planted when we are young, really inform how we see the world. I was curious how Rogue would trace back her interest in the paranormal and things that go bump in the night.
I almost want to say it's just kind of been there my whole life. I mean, definitely partly fostered by my father in the sense that he collects a lot of antiques. His style is very old-fashioned, very historical, if you will. So I was kind of obsessed with history as a kid. He was a huge advocate for, studying old literature and just everything that was very back in time, back in the day, in a different world, so to speak. And he actually took me to my first ever haunted walk. I think I was about 12 or 13. My father drives a lot, and he had a job that he had to do. I think it was in Kingston, actually. And he took me down, and we did the haunted walk there because I was basically traveling with him for the weekend, and it was something fun to do. And it was the first time. And I remember seeing the black cloak and the lantern and just everything about the visual aesthetic of it alone, let alone the fun storytelling of it, was just a great experience for me, to the point where anytime I've ever traveled now, the first thing I tend to look up in any city is what sort of haunted tour or ghost walk do they have available. And basically I always make sure that's sort of the first thing I do when I'm traveling anywhere, to get to know the city in sort of a different way that I feel is a lot more authentic to the nature of each city. It's not just like general tours where here, this building or this museum, and it was built at this time. It's stories about the location and the area that you're in. And so you get to kind of feel that history.
Given that our tour guides spend so much time at notoriously haunted locations, in some ways they are our best witnesses to potential paranormal activity. They're used to the sights and can easily identify when something is different or not quite right. And while we can never guarantee this kind of supernatural occurrence on a tour, it certainly does happen. The encounters can range from the more mundane, from feeling a presence or a cold spot, to something a little more spectacular, such as seeing an object move all on its own, or even photographing something very difficult to explain. What is extremely rare, and to my knowledge, has only happened once in haunted walk history, is when multiple witnesses see, for lack of a better expression, a ghost. A physical manifestation of a figure. Lucky for us, Rogue was one of those witnesses.
The most shocking, I guess, experience I had was at Black Creek Pioneer Village. I think this was in 2016, and I was there. I had just finished a tour. It was in October. They were quite busy, so we had tours leaving every 15 minutes, I think it was. My tour had just finished, and so I was standing in the visitor center with Rowena, my manager, and a tour had just left, but two people had arrived late for that tour. And so someone else had taken over the tickets, and Rowena and I went to escort these two people to the tour group that had already left. And as we're walking down the main path to get them to the tour group, the four of us are walking, and I see a woman in a sort of blue-gray dress. Her hair is, back, I think, under one of those sort of bonnet hood things. It was hard to see, but she was at a fair distance. And she was walking in front of the halfway house. Now, while we do a lot of these tours, depending on the night, there can be an escape game running, as well as the historical interpreters from Black Creek Pioneer Village itself. And we often see them walking around in costume. And one of my running jokes whenever I'm doing a tour with my group and we see someone in costume, I always kind of point them out as a little joke, like, we all see her, right? Group has a nice laugh. So the four of us are walking down, and I see this woman, and it's just the four of us, but I figure we're being social, and so I pulled the same thing. We all see her, right? And the guy beside me is like, yeah, and has a little chuckle. Rowena and the woman beside her says no. I just turned to look at Rowena, assuming that she's joking around with me or pulling my leg, because that's Rowena's style, and she's deadpan staring at me, shaking her head like, no, there's nothing there. And so I try and raise my flashlight, I ditched the lantern and went for the actual flashlight to shine it on this woman who's walking very blatantly in front of the halfway house on the wooden path. And I tried to describe her in more detail. It was, fairly dark out, and she was in fairly dark clothing. And I think I might have actually swore, to be honest. I don't know if I should be admitting that, but I think I said, BS, and tried to even run down the path to get my light on this woman so they could see her, because she was so tangibly there. And so yeah, it was a very surreal thing. And then she kind of just went into the halfway house, and there was a tour in the halfway house, so I couldn't just walk in there. But it was just, I didn't even know how to process it. And it was one of those, if I had had that experience, sort of on my own, or if everyone had seen it, then that's one thing. But to have one guy who said yes, he could see her too, to have Rowena, someone who I can, verify is not just trying to have an experience, and just being in that moment of shock. It should have just been one of those, haha, break the ice little jokes, but she wasn't there. And I fully, I even talked to my doctor afterwards. I have experienced odd things, but to see something that clear, I don't know, it was the most surreal experience I've ever had. There are other things where even if, it was something I kind of saw at the corner of my eye or something I felt, those are all things that I think to a point you can rationalize and figure out reasons for. But it was something that was so tangibly there. It took me a while to come back to work the next day, I'll say that.
Outside of working for the Haunted Walk, I know Rogue has a number of really interesting pursuits. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, she is a professional cosplayer. And if you follow her on Instagram at Northern Belle Rogue, that's Northern Belle Belle, Rogue Rogue, you can see some of her amazing photos and the various characters she had played. As I know very little about cosplay, and lesser still about being a professional cosplayer, I had to ask her what it was all about and why she does it.
I've been cosplaying since 2012, and it was a hobby turned work. It really depends. I think every cosplayer is different. So obviously cosplay being the whole putting on a costume and playing the character, but how people choose to continue that into a profession can vary from commissioning costumes to making appearances. For me personally, I mostly focus on performance. So I've worked with a lot of different YouTube channels, as well as being a cosplay guest. I'll often run panels. And because of the type of work I've done specifically with Artistic Curves, when I attend certain conventions, it depends in what capacity they're bringing me in. A lot of times I am a cosplay guest, so I'll bring prints of my work as well as some of my geeky cross stitches, as well as my novel, and sort of sell that at the table, in addition to doing photos with people who are coming. I will also, depending on the event, do body paint, a live body paint, which I'll actually be doing at Toronto Comic Con coming up this March. On Saturday, Artistic Curves will be doing Captain Marvel body paint live, so everyone can see the process from start to finish and what that's like. And we also sometimes give panels, which may or may not happen at Toronto Comic Con, on sort of the basics of body paint. So I focus mostly on sort of the performance aspect, and I don't want this to sort of sound kind of cheesy, but I also try to focus a lot on the charity aspects of a lot of things. So I do a lot of events where Wonder Woman or various characters will make an appearance. I've got one actually coming up this Saturday, CJ's Kids Being Kids. And it's an event for families and children with cancer. And so it's an opportunity for kids who spend a lot of time in the hospital and spend a lot of time in and out of doctor's offices to get to be at the skate park and just be kids and hang out with superheroes. And St. John's Ambulance brings in the therapy dogs. And it's just a really fun day. And I also do a cosplay cleanup around Earth Day where we go and clean up the park. And so, I also try and focus on that very community give back aspect as well. I love Wonder Woman because she's such a hit with kids, and kids really respond to her. And I've never seen so many little girls run across a room to a complete stranger to come give me a hug and tell me how awesome I am. And then I tell them how awesome they are, and then they smile and I smile. And then, it's a really great costume for that.
If not busy enough, Rogue has also had another major accomplishment in the past few months. She wrote and published her first novel, Willow's Story.
Willow's Story is a young adult fiction novel where it follows the character Willow from ages 7 to 17. It's a coming-of-age story and just following her in her life journey. Some people would classify it as fantasy, and I guess that's technically where it would fit. However, there's nothing really fantastical in the sense of, magic or dragons or anything like that. But I would have liked to have done historical fiction, but I didn't have the time, effort, and energy to research everything that would have been required to make it historical fiction. So I sort of created my own Canada circa 1600s, give or take. But because it was my own world, I didn't have to adhere to certain social norms, or I could create different social norms. It deals with a lot of darker themes. It deals with a lot of trauma and abuse and sort of how people overcome that or deal with that. Largely, this book was the book I wish I had when I was a teenager. And I think why it's a young adult novel. There's definitely a lot I could have done as far as developing it and turning it into a more adult novel. But I think a large part of this was the book I needed as a teenager that I didn't have, and that I sort of scraped together experiences combining things like V.C. Andrews and Harry Potter and hoping for the best. because it is a young adult novel and because it's exploring such dark themes and the kind of aspects that we really deal with trauma, putting it in a sort of other world also just helps create enough distance for anyone reading it. Because it's the kind of thing where if you can read this and this is nowhere near your life experience, I think you'll be fine. But if you do read this, and I have even cautioned readers, and there's a little note to the reader in the beginning of the book, saying take care of yourself before you take care of Willow, because if her life experience is similar to yours, it can be triggering. It could be what you need, or it could be what you really don't need right now. Having it in a world that is much more removed from our own helps anyone who's a reader going through anything similar to create enough distance, but also have that connection with the character. Currently, there are 3 copies left at Glad Day Bookshop, downtown Toronto. I will be selling them at Toronto Comic Con all weekends long in March, and you can also find them online. If you go to willowstory.com, there's a click-through link where you can purchase the book online.
I think a lot of people dream of writing a novel, myself certainly included, but few of us actually get around to doing it. Now that she has written and published a book, I was wondering if there's any insights Rogue could share, particularly for those of us who have only dreamt about doing what she has done.
The biggest thing for the entire process is to just do it. It's exhausting, it's long, and it's hard. If you don't sit down and do the thing, it'll never happen. And so there are times where I'm inspired. If you feel that inspiration, ride that. Pull out your phone, write it on a little napkin, write it wherever you are, and keep those, collect those, and eventually you'll have some sort of manuscript. Because it's not always, I've got my coffee, I'm ready, I'm at my laptop, now I write. That's typically where we all stare at a blank Word document for the next hour and a half before going on Netflix and giving up. I think when it comes to inspiration, we can never predict when it's going to happen. And the second it does, if you can identify that inspiration, you have to get it down then. Whether it's a voice memo on your phone, capture all those moments and collect them. Because 3 years can go by really quick, but then you might look at this little box of notes and realize you already have a book. The other thing I would say is, for my personal experience, it only took me 2 months to write the book. I started January 25th, 2017, and it was finished by March 25th. It took me a year and a half to figure out self-publishing. Know that wherever you are in your process, honor that part of the process. Some parts move quick and some parts move extremely slow. And it can be really frustrating. Like, personally, I have ADHD, so anytime something starts taking longer than it should, I start to lose my mind and it drives me nuts. It's one of those things you just have to know that wherever you are in the process, maybe the writing is going to take 2 years for you, but then you're going to get a signed publishing deal, and so you're not even going to have to figure out the publishing part. You don't know where you are in the process or what your process looks like, so don't rush it. Let it flow and follow it, and understand that there's no one answer. There's no one way. There's no one approach.
Having gone through the experience and successfully making it to the other side, I wonder if this has inspired her to start thinking about another book.
Funny you should mention, I've actually got another fully finished manuscript called Cloak and Lantern. That book is a little more, I think, along the lines of a haunted walk life, if you would call it as such. It's basically the kind of story where there is an old-timey village where people give tours and some interesting spooky things happen. But just sort of the idea, I was doing, I believe it was 2017, and it was NaNoWriMo, so November, write a novel, and I really wanted to do it. I've always wanted to do this challenge. I've thought about doing it for years, but I always get distracted, and it never happened. And so I was sitting there, November 1st, 2017, trying to think of some sort of concept. And having it just had been the Halloween season and spending most of my days at Black Creek Pioneer Village, the only thing I could think about was ghosts. So I wrote a ghost story.
A big thank you to Rogue for taking part in today's episode. And if you happen to join her for a tour in Toronto, please let her know that you heard her on the show today. While we focused on Rogue, all of our tour guides in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto have extremely interesting backstories and lives. And when you join us for your next tour, don't hesitate to ask your guide a little about themselves. They would love to share, and being tour guides, they love to talk. At the Haunted Walk, we do consider ourselves a family, and we are very proud of the excellence, dedication, and fun that all of our tour guides bring to the business. As always, thank you to Michelle Dennis, our incredible audio editor, and to Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com for the additional music. Information about our tours can always be found on our website, hauntedwalk.com, and if you want to apply to be one of our awesome tour guides, please visit hauntedwalk.com/jobs and fill out that very short application. I will let you know, the sooner you apply, the more beneficial it can be to you getting a position. So don't hesitate if you're interested. We'd also love to connect with you on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all three at Haunted Walk. Until we meet again, sweet dreams.